Good day to you all, and greetings from a freezing cold Berlin this week. My name's Mark McCartney, and welcome to the What is a Good Life podcast. If you're new to this podcast, over the last couple of years, I've interviewed over 170 people around this question, not to define the good life or to prescribe universal answers, but to help you find and define your own answer by listening to other people's reflections, lines of inquiries, and curiosities, while I'm also trying to share more genuine expressions of the human experience and genuine conversations. Which brings us to this week and the 52nd episode of the What is a Good Life podcast. I'm delighted to introduce Martin Ebeling as our guest. Martin is a philosopher and co-director at the School of Life Berlin. He is also a co-founder of the Pura Vida Festival Retreat. Well, you can follow his journey toward an exploration of co-flourishing on the Co-flourishing Project, where he writes under his alias Ocean. In this deeply insightful conversation, we delve into Martin's exploration of the meaning of life and his shifting from a lone wolf to his fascination with co-flourishing. He shares how his recent insights and revelations on co-flourishing unfolded after a personal retreat in nature and silence, shedding light on valuable lessons we can all draw from these experiences. We explore what has resonated with him on his research on co-flourishing, encompassing the practices he observed at a Zen monastery, Plum Village. Here, monks consistently share about their wonder in existence and their experiences with difficult emotions. Additionally, we touch on the neuroscience that suggests it takes more than one human brain to create a human mind. I'll repeat that again, as that kind of blew my mind in the interview. It takes more than one human brain to create a human mind. And we also reflect on the interdependent nature of our being. I found this conversation to be highly illuminating. We discussed numerous themes that can guide you to living a more connected life, connecting with yourself, fostering meaningful relationships with others, and cultivating a deeper connection with the world around you. Look, I took a hell of a lot from this conversation. I think Martin is exploring something really connecting, insightful, and also beautiful in many ways. And so I hope you take a lot from this conversation as well. And if you enjoy this episode, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you're on the podcasting platforms, please continue to leave your lovely reviews, as I greatly appreciate your support at this stage of my podcasting journey. So without further ado, the 52nd episode of the What is a Good Life podcast. Martin, thank you very much for joining me today on the What is a Good Life podcast. From following some of your content on LinkedIn and some of the projects that you've been involved in, and even just this very intriguing note that you sent me over the festive period as well. I've been very much looking forward to this conversation.
So have I. Thank you for having me.
So Martin, as I kick these things off with, it is with the question of, is there a question you're trying to answer as you move through life?
Yeah, I think there are many questions I try to answer, from the more mundane, what do I need to get from the grocery store this morning, to the more encompassing ones. What's the meaning of life? And I think that question, morphs into other questions. What am I supposed to do? What does life want from me? What is my calling? What is my purpose? How am I supposed to do this thing called living a life on this planet? I think that's something I do spend a good amount of time thinking about.
And how is that journey presently taking shape for you?
What's presently happening for me is that I'm thinking about a term that I don't know if I came up with the term, but at least in my mind I did. It's called co-flourishing. So flourishing is one way of looking at the good life. The good life, you can think of happiness as either a state. We experience a lot of pleasure and we accumulate experiences of pleasure, and that accumulation of pleasure makes a good life. Or you can think about the good life as a process of unfolding, of developing your potential, of diving deeper and also expanding at the same time. And I think that's a more accurate description of what the good life actually is. It's not mere pleasure. There's an interesting thought experiment. We can dive into it for a moment if you're game. So the experiment is this. Okay, so the experiment is this. I have a pleasure machine here with me, and it gives you the most blissful experiences that you could ever want and imagine. And I could hook you up, so you can have these blissful experiences. But there's a catch, and the catch is that I won't once I hook you up to the machine, I won't be able to detach the machine from your system. So you will be in this state of supreme bliss and pleasure for the rest of your life. But everything that is your life now will be lost to you. All the relationships that you have, all the meaningful struggles that you pursue in life, all of that is gone. So it'll just be a simulation of experience that will be pleasurable for you, like in the Matrix, right? So the
Yeah.
question to you, Mark, is: should I hook you up to the machine?
I don't know whether it's my, I don't know, my proclivity from suffering from my Catholic upbringing, but there's something about, I don't know, there's something about kind of perpetual pleasure that almost sounds. I don't know. It's. I even put my hands to my face there when you were saying it. It
Mm.
almost sounds. There's something like. It almost sounds like creepy, or like it would
Mm.
be. I don't know, like a dismissal of so much of what life is.
Mm. Mm.
You know,
Right.
like
Yeah. Hmm.
there's and you know, I had this conversation actually with someone over Christmas where we were
Hmm.
reflecting on really difficult moments in their life, and both this person and I were probably in a, I'd say, a reasonably contented phase of our life, and thinking
Hmm.
if any of these seminal moments in our lives were any different, our present
Hmm.
experience wouldn't be what it is,
Right.
which still entails, you know, I have different stresses in my life still, obviously, things that I'd like to achieve, projects that I need to step into, all of these kind of feelings that even come with voluntary experiences or things that I'm interested in.
Hmm.
I don't know, just something to me about perpetual pleasure
Yeah.
sounds really off-putting to me.
Right. I think the way you phrase it was beautiful. There is a dismissal of what life is also about happening in that experiment, in that thought experiment, right? So life is also about the growth that we experience when we go through a valley of despair and when
Yeah,
we come out on the other side. But also just, developing our innate talents and pursuing a path that was maybe in some way meant for us, and working on projects like this podcast, that might not always be pleasurable. I'm sure there are sometimes periods of struggle, or when you edit
absolutely.
a show, or and but it's still worthwhile to you. It's a worthwhile pursuit, right? So life is about that too, and happiness and the good life is not just an accumulation of pleasure. It's also about growth and expansion, and it's a process of flourishing. Now, I think that we should think a little bit further than that. And that's why I offer the concept of co flourishing, because we're not solitary creatures, right? So, I would say the standard view in Western societies, at least, is that, or what we call Western societies, is that we are these individual containers that house a self or a conscious self, right? And then when we when we get lucky and we build the skills of emotional intelligence, we can bridge the separation that exists between these isolated containers. We can have wholesome relationships with other people and beings and nature and so on, and in spirituality and wherever you might find these connections. But fundamentally, we are separate entities, and the world exists of separate entities. And the alternative view is that we are already in an interdependent reality. We are part of an interdependent reality. Our social reality is interdependent. I carry everything that I have received in my upbringing through my parents, my friends, my teachers, and so on and so on, in me, my culture. I'm German. I carry the legacy of war, of the Holocaust, of so many things in me. My parents are from East Germany, so I carry that in me too, right? So I am because all of that is, in a way. And as you said earlier, you are because your life experiences are what they were, right? You are today because your life experiences are what they were. So in that picture, we are we are interconnected beings. And there's a Buddhist teacher who passed away recently, Thich Nhat Hanh, who coined the term interbeing for this, right? We
Mm.
inter are, we're an interdependent existence. And if we think about life that way, then I think we can move one step further from flourishing to co-flourishing, and understand that our biggest potential lies in exploring these connections, nourishing these connections, and that true abundance for us only comes when we elevate with us what we stand in relationship with. So that the good life is not just an individual pursuit, but more of a communal pursuit.
This all sounds absolutely delightful, and I love how you articulated this as well. And it rings true with so much of what I've been experiencing in the last number of years. I would say I'm intrigued from your perspective what your journey has been to
Mm-hmm.
this point of not only I know you kind of elaborated on the sense of even just using the word flourishing,
Mm-hmm.
but then the very significant part of the co-flourishing element of this.
Yeah.
Just kind of curious as to how that's evolved for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I started out on the other end of the spectrum as a lonely wolf, really.
Yeah, yeah,
So I was very much in this. I'm separate from everyone else, and the world to some extent is enemy territory, and I have to build these very very um, thick defenses against the world that is potentially threatening. Right.
yeah,
So something out there is after me. They're out there to get me. And so from this lonely wolf that was carried trauma from uh, previous generations, but also from my own experience as a child and a teenager into adulthood, and then realized at some point, well, this is not really helpful. This is not a helpful way of looking at the world. This might have been beneficial at some point when there was a vulnerable teenager protecting himself against a certain environment, but it's no longer helpful, and it's not wise either. So I studied philosophy. I'm a philosopher by training, and it's not a wise way of looking at life, right? It's not helpful. It's not wise, um, and nevertheless, it's deeply in my system, right? So there was a long healing journey to move from a lonely wolf to maybe a turtle that can stick its head out of its protective what do you call this, the
the
shell
shell.
of the turtle.
Yeah,
Yeah. So it can just lurk out and then kind of move out more and become a different being, that is out there more in the world, and show up with vulnerability and doesn't feel as threatened. And I think there's so many elements to that healing journey. I'm super happy to dive into it, but um, and I don't think it's complete. I think the lonely wolf is still very much alive in me at times, and I try to have a loving and nourishing relationship with the lonely wolf in me. So, yeah.
isn't isn't that interesting though? The idea of all what you've said in terms of co-flourishing, this even what Thich Nhat Hanh said in terms of interbeing, um, this beautiful kind of capturing of all that's gone into creating who you are in this very moment. And I feel it too. I don't know whether it's from the point of view of still some not like distrust of the world. I feel I live quite a trusting experience, but I still very much, there's still mistrust still exists within me. And even I don't know whether it's a sense of wanting to go forth with my projects and achieve something that is very much that I did, or something to that effect.
Mm,
But
mm, mm,
the lonely wolf still still exists within me
mhm.
while acknowledging so many of these other things as well.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting what you said. Sometimes it's tied up with ego, right? So sometimes what's holding us back is the belief that what we do is about us, rather than it's about the thing itself, right?
Yeah.
So you might have a perspective on your podcast. Sometimes it's about you, and oh, my name is in connected with it, and I get the fame, and my show is growing, and so on. Hopefully, the audience,
Yeah.
and and sometimes it's just about the question, right? It's just about the guests that you host so beautifully, and then it changes. I would assume. I mean, happy to hear it from you. Does it change for you when you make it more about the question or the project and less about yourself?
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm there, but I think there's also a purity of sharing, even of myself, that doesn't feel
Hmm.
personal. or
Mm-hmm.
sorry, not a
Mm-hmm.
purity. There's a quality,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, definitely. I think sometimes as well, even if I am not even making it about myself, but sharing something of a personal nature, it's also I think there's a desire to be understood. You
Mm.
know, and just while you're asking it now, that kind of makes me think of, there's an insecurity maybe even within that of I want to be, if I'm going to put something out, I want it to be very clearly understood that this is what I mean. There's not a playfulness or a trust that if I say something,
Mm.
that it will just be interpreted in a fair manner. And so sometimes I
Mm.
can get caught up
Mm-hmm.
with that. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
definitely I definitely want the conversation to be a co-creation or a stepping or an unfolding into some degree of unknown. And
Mm-hmm.
in that space, it is leaving aside what I'm hoping to protect of myself or project of
Mm-hmm.
myself. And it's
Mm-hmm.
more in the curiosity or interest of uncovering something for me, and uncovering something for a listener and a guest as well. Like if we're
Mm-hmm.
all willing to go there.
Yeah, I think I'm in a somewhat similar situation. It's not as I mean, you have it's a very um, there's a lot of aliveness in a conversation, right? So it happens, it's unfolding in the present moment. For me, with this co-flourishing project that I'm trying to bring into the world, it's a similar dynamic because I was thinking about this for a very long term, and part of the story, how it emerged, was that I was just with two friends, and we had co-working sessions. And at some point, we realized these are not co-working sessions; these are co-flourishing sessions. Because in each day when we met, we took time to dive into a question or a problem that one of us might have, and we dedicated time to just sharing our perspectives and finding new ways of looking at it, and hopefully helpful ways and solutions to the problem. And so we renamed our group chat to from co-working to co-flourishing, and that's how the concept was born. And then I've been sitting with this for a long time, but there were always doubts in my mind. Is this who am I to do this? Parts holding me back, afraid of judgment and probably judging myself. Some parts of me judging other parts, and so on. So like this internal mess that we have going on. And it was only now over Christmas I actually went to a hut in nature and just meditated, went for long walks, and was in silence. And then at some point it came out, and I started writing the Co-flourishing Project on Substack. So it's coming out now, and it took this retreat from society and from the being in contact with others to really feel what truly wants to come out, right? And to have full trust in that, and just allow it to unfold.
Could you track? I'm not trying to make this a linear experience of day one, day
Mm.
three, and this and so forth, and it unfolded this way. But what was the quality or the significance of that space, that quietness, whatever way you'd like to characterize it? What was the significance of that in the process of allowing what wanted to come out to come out?
Mm. Um, I think for me it was hugely significant, um, and it took 2 days of just being with myself in silence for things to come up, negative emotions, negative thoughts. And on the third day I was able to shift it. I found a way of just letting go, and inviting in what is helpful to invite in. And I found really deep states of meditation in that. Um, and the connection to nature was also very, very uh, helpful. I think in a way, this question, what is the meaning of life? Like nature doesn't ask, life itself doesn't ask that question. A tree doesn't ask
Right.
that question. Life itself is just growing. It's doing its thing. It knows what to do, right? And it's finding ways. You cut off a branch, well, then another branch will grow, even bigger. So life doesn't ask that question. And I think if we're in contact with nature and if we experience ourselves more as part of nature, I think these questions also become a little less um, powerful, or um, the volume is decreased in our mind. It's not so much a question. It's more a way of being. And so just to allow myself to enter into this state of being, where this just is the outpouring of that state of being, that was very significant for the process for me.
There's something really beautiful about doing something or being something that we feel aligns with our own internal nature. And
Mm.
as you said, like just how that seems to lend a hand to then the noise, the questions, not even
Mm-hmm.
the doubts, because they can all simultaneously exist and you can still move through an experience. But there's something I find extremely comforting about feeling whatever I may be doing, if it just feels like it's me or an expression of me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then I don't know, the chips may fall where they may at that point, because
Mm-hmm.
if it's not, if the point of my life isn't to be me, well then that leads me to pretty confused states. You know what I mean? But
Okay, so
but
your Catholic upbringing didn't take that away from you.
no.
There we go. Still okay to be me.
Yeah. I must say I left at a pretty early stage.
Mm.
But yeah, there's something really lovely about
Mhm.
the idea of just engaging in nature and just seeing everything else just kind of go about its business without the
Mhm.
second guessing, without the narratives. Um,
Mhm.
and just we're not judging that so much. Like I've
Mhm.
mentioned before, that I love this an observation by Ram Dass where he mentions going through a forest and he's not, looking at every tree going, that one's too tall, too fat, too short, too
Mm.
thin. Do you know what I mean? Like we're
Mhm.
more than comfortable with just letting nature do its thing.
Mhm.
Why not just let ourselves do our thing, whatever that looks like?
Absolutely. I love thinking of our life and also humans as plants, actually,
Right.
So, like sometimes you have characters that you might find a little bit off-putting, and then just imagine what kind of flower is that? We're all like life. When we go to nature, we're like, oh, life is expressing itself in such beautiful colors and shapes, right? And then when we see humans, we're like, you're annoying and you're annoying and I don't like you and I don't like you either. you know? But this is also life expressing itself in beautiful shapes and colors. So if we can just switch the perspectives a little, it's helpful to me at least sometimes to just then imagine what flower, in what way is life expressing itself in this person? And how is life coming into abundance through you, even though I might not like that particular, it's not a flower I would put in my living room, right? It's not, I don't vibe with that particular expression of abundance as much as with others, but it's still an expression of abundance. And I think life is a process actually of co-flourishing. When we look into nature, we see that it's an interconnected web of being, and that each part needs the other parts for it to grow and to grow into its full abundance. And I think there's a beautiful lesson. I learned it from looking at what is called syntropic agriculture, which is an approach to agriculture developed by a Swiss gentleman who, I think Georg or Gregor Goetz, I've got the name right now. And he just looked at nature, and he looked at what nature is doing with a barren field and how it comes into abundance. And there are stages to it that he had identified. There are the colonizing plants, and then there is an accumulation system happening. So the colonizing plants are pushed out because other plants can grow. And then after this accumulation system, there is an abundance system when the ecosystem is really in full swing. And nature has, so what it shows is first a path towards abundance that he mimics in agriculture. So he then he tried it in Switzerland. He's, I think, now doing it in Brazil, and just creates these very lush ecosystems mimicking this process. But there's also a message here, at least for me, that I took away from it is one, nature wants to come into abundance. So with whatever resources there are in an ecosystem, nature will create the most abundance that can potentially be there, right? And we are nature, right? And so for me, this means nature wants us to come into abundance, right? It's a natural drive. Life wants to be in its full abundance. And the way to get there, and I want to link it back to co-flourishing, the way to get there is not with our individual pursuit of happiness on our own yoga mat and our own cushion and our own career and so on and so on. But just as nature does it, leaning into our interconnectedness, nourishing what nourishes us, and growing together and reaching a state of abundance as a communal or collective pursuit.
Nature wants us to come into abundance. That's absolutely gorgeous.
Mm.
And I also love, by the way, this viewing other people as different plants or flowers. That's definitely something
Mm.
I'm going to be taking from this conversation already. So just
You
in
can try it out
terms
right
then.
now. What flower am I? Do you know? Just
A beautiful rose, Martin. A beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you.
So with it, like with this, I know you're talking about interconnection, interdependency. You were you went off to Brandenburg and you had this kind of self retreat, as you coined it to me before. You saw nature, you saw nature just do its thing. That it also provides you inspiration even within your own process. So what can you kind of map out more what the co-flourishing project even looks like or entails? Or I know
Mm,
you've been kind of given some of the inspiration behind it, but just what
mm,
does it kind of look like then on a kind of practical level,
mm.
if you get me?
Yeah, yeah, of course. So I think the first part, the kind of the conceptual innovation, should already have practical consequences, right? So when the terms that we use to describe reality, the concepts that we use, can change the reality that we describe, right? So when I think about my life um, as, or when I think of all the people that I meet as complete jerks who are probably out there to get me, I will relate to them differently than when I think, ooh, these are all deep down, they're all good-hearted people. You know, they have Buddha nature and they're just these gems. And occasionally they are confused by strong emotions that they can't handle so well. So sometimes I might get some negativity, but it has nothing to do with them. So I describe them in different terms, and that leads to a different way of relating, right? Now, if I think about the good life in a different way and not as in an individual way, then this will already have consequences for how I live my life. I will be more aware of the connections that I have. I will hopefully also spend more time and energy nurturing them. And I don't only mean connections to other humans, but also to the more than human life. Um, so that's already one practical implication that I hope a new concept can generate. But then I think there are also many co-flourishing practices, as we might call them, that exists in many communities that are not necessarily part of mainstream culture, right? So part of the co-flourishing project is to look at these practices that we might call co-flourishing practices and make them more known in mainstream culture so that they receive wider adoption. Um, so it's a bit of a research project also for me to dive into these practices and explore them. Um, and I think they happen in three, at least in three categories. It's about, you know, my own flourishing and co-flourishing with the multiplicity that I am, right? With the multiple parts that I have within me. How can I co-flourish with those? It's co-flourishing in relationships, and it's also co-flourishing with the planet and life itself, right? I can if I can share a bit more.
Oh,
So I went
please.
to,
Yeah,
yeah.
please. Yeah.
I think I also want to look. I work a lot with organizations and leaders and think about, you know, how to build an organizational culture that might be emblematic of co-flourishing. And one organization that I think is really a great example is the monastery, Plum Village, that Thich Nhat Hanh actually founded, the person who coined the term into being. And so I went there and just explored how they do things over there. So, and it's interesting because they, of course, they have their own way of flourishing on the spiritual path, right? But so they meditate, they do all their practices. But for Thich Nhat Hanh, it was very evident that you can't do this by yourself. So he says the most important spiritual duty of a monk, even before any meditation and rituals or whatever, is to build community, is to build a sangha, a Buddhist community. Because without the sangha, without the Buddhist community, your mind of compassion will wither. So you need, even for your own, and it's a beautiful example of interbeing, because for your own path towards enlightenment, for your own spiritual growth, you need the community. And without the community, you can't achieve that type of abundance, right? So we can only do it together. And when I came to Plum Village, I interviewed the monks, the monastics that I met there, and I obviously also read a bunch of books that are available on the practices that they have, and they have a lot of practices of preventing or transforming conflict. One of them is watering the flowers. So it's also a communal practice of first sharing what is really beautiful, what you perceive as beautiful, that is watering the flowers, and then also expressing your pain that you have, right? And it's not even necessary that there's a direct response to that. It's enough that the container of the community receives that message and can hold that pain, and then there's trust that this can have an effect, right? This awareness, because people are listening with compassion, with the intent to reduce suffering in the community. And they have other practices too, and they do Dharma sharings, which is, I think, one of the key ways in which humanity has to kind of come back to a very basic practice of co-flourishing. It's just sitting in a circle and talking about your emotions and listening with an open heart, you know. So
Yeah.
how often do we actually do that, which was a basic practice for all of humanity until we kind of lost our way, you know, just sitting in a circle and sharing what's actually there.
And this is this year now that we're into January 1st, towards the end of last year, I was hosting conversation groups that were doing just this.
Mm-hmm.
And I even notice in my personal life, when I have friendships or relationships where we do just share what we're experiencing,
Mm-hmm.
nobody has to do any, like,
Yeah.
people can listen. There's lots, that's me looking at it from,
Mm-hmm.
listening is almost inactive, if you know what I mean. But like truly paying attention to somebody, being present with them, that
Mm-hmm.
does a phenomenal amount
Mm-hmm.
without us even having to open our mouths.
Mm-hmm.
And it almost goes in complete contradiction probably to how I lived the first 30 to 35 years of my life, where somebody says something and I probably tell them it's all going to be okay and this
Mm-hmm.
is how you can fix it. And
Right. Exactly.
and that does so little
Mm-hmm.
versus what I've seen, just this sitting, sharing,
Mm-hmm.
acknowledging.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something really beautiful, I think, about sharing our inner experience or our stream of consciousness sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
which doesn't revolve around having even to share our deep traumas.
Mm-hmm.
There's such an incredible intimacy, I think, that is created from just
Mm-hmm.
sharing what is.
Mm-hmm. Right. Absolutely. And for that to happen, you need the others to be present in a certain way, right? So you can generate that experience for yourself and by yourself, and though it's still so deeply nourishing to have that experience, and it's one of the basic needs that we have as humans, is to be heard and to be seen, to be understood by others, right? Don't
When
know.
you were
Yeah.
when you were interviewing these
Mm-hmm.
monks and you were
Mm-hmm.
at it's Plum Tree Village, isn't it? Or have I
Plum Village. Plum
Plum
Village.
Village, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you were at Plum Village, then were you like Did you get a very strong sense of feeling that this was a very like embodied and lived experience for people there?
Hmm. I did. It was even a little bit confusing. I went for a 2 week retreat, and when I arrived, I already sensed that there's a very gentle vibe to this community. It's very gentle, and the practice also is very gentle. First, I called it lazy Zen because they only, they sit for the meditations like at most, like I think at most 45 minutes to an hour in the morning, but sometimes just half an hour. Then there's a walking meditation before lunch. And then there is another evening sitting meditation for half an hour to 45 minutes or so. And from the retreat experiences I have had, it's like 10 hours sitting in meditation in silence, not talking to anyone. So, very
Yeah.
the opposite, right? Um, but at the same time, I felt like it's really it's the vibe is so gentle that at some point I rephrased it from lazy Zen to gentle Zen, and the practice continues throughout the day. At least that's the idea, by being aware of the wonders of existence, really. So mindfulness, um, to according to Thich Nhat Hanh, at least, is, I mean, he says, Buddhism is all about suffering. It's the first noble truth, right? Life is suffering. Um, but there is so much wonder and beauty in life that mindfulness can help us become aware of. So in a way, I think he did to Buddhism what positive psychology did to psychology, right? We don't need to look only at the negative side of things. We can also look at the beauty and the wonders, and we can walk around the beautiful nature in around Plum Village or anywhere really, and just become aware of its beauty and be mindful and present with what is in the present moment. As we eat food, we can become fully aware of um, the tastes, and we can also become aware of our interconnectedness with the people who harvested these foods, and the sun and the rain and the microbes in the earth and everything that contributed to nourishing this food. So it can be a deep experience of being interconnected with everything that exists, even with the minerals in the earth, in the simple experience of eating. So um, and then I reflected further, and I thought, why do they have all these practices? Why do they do all of this? Um, why so much effort in a way? Like, why is here a community that puts so much effort on creating harmony, when in other organizations we don't see that as much? And then it dawned on me that it's a closed system. These monastics, they work together and they live together, they share a room together. There is no way out. It's a closed system. It's not completely true, because they do have retreatants coming in, and that's actually, it's important to the ecosystem there as well. And they go out and teach abroad and so on and so on. It's not completely closed, but we can look at it as a closed system. And then it makes sense why they put so much effort into kind of um, cleaning their emotional laundry properly, because they can't rely on outsiders to do it for them. And that is something that we have in other organizations happening a lot, right? So you go to work, you have a shitty boss who, who's a little tyrant, and then you go home and you vent to your friends or to your family, and the organization that you work in relies on other parts of society to clean that emotional laundry, to reduce that suffering
Mm.
in you. Because if it wasn't reduced, you couldn't go back to work. You would just yell at your boss at some point. You would flip, right? So the I thought this is something really interesting, that, or important, that what if we can create organizations that don't rely on families and friends and others to do the work for them. But what if we can create organizations that create harmony within themselves, that have practices of expressing emotional pain and processing it, not maybe in directly saying this is how we can help and this is how we can change it and everything will be okay, but just by having an opportunity to be listened to and to be seen
Mm.
in your emotional pain. And how would that change the world of work, I wonder?
I am just in my head. I'm going exponentially, but it's. I'd never really thought about the role of family and friends in kind of washing our emotional laundry from work experiences, and that kind
Mm,
of maintains the status quo or your capacity to continue to do the job.
mm-hmm,
Whereas, but it really is just, it keeps things manageable, right? It never gets to a state of flourishing then if the direct participants can't acknowledge their own emotions or their own experiences to one
mm-hmm,
another.
mm-hmm,
Like it's almost like having an emotional affair with somebody else to to be able to continue on in the current relationship,
mm-hmm,
and therefore it will never become the thing that is sustainable in of itself. Like that could
mm-hmm,
be part of a not I know you're saying it's not a fully closed community at Plum Village, but just
mm-hmm,
that they do the work. They constantly do the work
mm-hmm,
to keep cleaning out whatever emotional baggage there
mm-hmm,
is.
mm-hmm,
And I think this is one of the biggest kind of misconceptions we have, even with some of our great relationships. People we kind of maybe even look at the outside from other people's relationships and we think they've got a really good relationship, as if it's almost this like static entity of good relationship.
mm-hmm,
But I know even in my own experience, whether with my wife or even good friends that I have a lot of intimacy with, if we are going to be real with each other, that opens itself up to potential volatile conversations or emotional situations
mm-hmm,
that we continually need to go through in
mm-hmm,
order
mm-hmm,
to maintain the quality of the relationship. We
mm-hmm,
we can never just get to a place where I had a great 2 years with this person and therefore we
mm-hmm,
don't have to keep going into these conversations.
mm-hmm.
So
Right.
I I
I mean,
love the
again, if
idea of
yeah,
this. Yeah, please.
yeah, if again, if you look at a relationship like a plant, you can't say, "Oh, now this is the state, this is the shape that looks great.
Yeah.
So now please stop growing." If you ask the plant to stop growing, it means death, right?
Yeah.
So in order for a relationship to be alive, no matter how beautiful it is, it will require our willingness to go into these conversations and to explore whatever is alive in any moment with each other.
Just when you mentioned you did various research that took you to in different areas,
Mhm.
what has surprised you almost the most in what you've discovered in whatever way
Mm.
it surprised you?
Oh, I mean, I went into many different disciplines, and the interesting thing is that they all seem to say the same thing in their own vocabulary.
Hmm.
It is an interconnected reality, and like deal with it. So,
Yeah.
but I think what I find most fascinating is probably the neuroscience of co-flourishing. Um, I can give you two examples. One of them is from a quote from Elisa Feldman Barrett, who is a world-renowned neuroscientist on the neuroscience of emotions. And in her book on emotions, How Emotions Are Made, which is really an amazing popular science book that took her 7 or 13 years to write. I don't know, but like a lot of her career is in there, and it's really brilliant. And there's one quote, and she doesn't spend much time musing on it or exploring its significance, but she says it takes more than one human brain to create a human mind. It creates more than
Wow.
one human brain to create a human mind. And that is something that we don't usually think. We think, oh, brain, mind, right? Okay, brain, consciousness. Okay, we can that might be true, right? But she says for it to have a human mind, the mind that we are accustomed to, it needs something else. It needs input from the culture around it to receive the categories that it takes to construct human experience in the way that we're used to, right? And she's particularly concerned with emotion categories. So um, concepts like I'm angry, I'm hurt, I'm sad, and so on and so on. These are concepts that we first learn from others to make sense of our emotional experience, which in her theory is really an interpretation of uh, affect in a certain way. Um, and if we manage to interpret it a certain way, our inner world a certain way, then it's helpful for us to manage our energy and so on and so on. So there's a more complicated story behind it, but the consequence here is that for even we're so interconnected, then even for us to have the experience of the world and of ourselves that we currently have would be impossible without others, without a culture around us that enables us to have that experience. So that was one very surprising thing about the neuroscience of co-flourishing. And the another aspect is with what a child needs to regulate themselves. So the brain of a child is often overwhelmed by experience, especially emotional experience, and it needs an attuned adult brain to help regulate that emotional experience for them, right? So in a way, the brain of the infant uses the more emotionally more mature neurocircuits of the adult to regulate its emotional experience. And if that co-regulation is going well, then it will learn self-regulation. So co-regulation comes before self-regulation, and it's actually two, like one brain using the other brain to do it with them. And so I think that's also a fascinating perspective.
Which I don't know. There seems like there's a kind of wonderfully grounding element to how we not tether ourselves, but more like mesh or interact with another field around us. Like I was almost thinking there
Mm-hmm.
as you were saying that of if you have any particular friend who always just seems very kind of calm or present, like just
Mm-hmm.
even sitting in their presence sometimes,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it almost gives like it alters how
Mm-hmm.
I'm engaging with
Mm-hmm.
that moment or
Mm-hmm.
them as well. Like I think there's
Yeah.
a beautiful kind of not like dancing with, but just flowing with somebody
Mm-hmm.
else's state.
Yeah. I just want to say one thing to that. It's not that we do something to enter that field, right? It's not separate self doing something to enter a field. It's from the beginning we're in that field.
Yeah,
There's nothing you can do. If I frown at you, if I smile at you, it'll have a direct effect on you.
yeah,
You are in my field. I am in your field. I am because you are. You are because I am. From the very beginning, there is no, that's how ingrained the thinking is that we're separate. That we think, oh, two separate, and then I like this system has to do something in order to be in the field of that other system. That's not the case. We're constantly in each other's fields without doing
yeah.
anything.
That's you put that much better than I was fumbling around with. So thank you, thank you for thank you for clarifying that. Um,
Mm,
so then you've identified these areas of okay, how can I flourish with myself? How can I flourish with other people? How can I flourish with the world around me? And even just when you're mentioning the awareness of where my food comes from, all the things
mm,
that are involved in the cultivation of that and the interconnectivity between me and that.
mm,
You mentioned going to Plum Village then, and just this very important part of just this communication, this interdependency. Then touching on areas whether it's the emotional sense of that I or that we regulate each other in the way or in this coexisting way that we do. Where does this what then are you kind of calling into action? Then I know you're saying that there's these ideas and even these concepts, and holding these will alter the way in which we perceive the world and interact with one another.
mm.
How does this present itself then in what you're creating or offering?
Mm, ask me again in 10 years from now. I don't know. I honestly don't know. So right now it's just I'm it just wants to come out in the way it
Yeah,
does, and I feel alive doing it. talking about it, writing about it. I I have this research project of collecting practices and exploring them and diving deeper. And I think there is just so much to share and so many ways of experiencing beauty or growth, and just making them available to more people. And it's really, I mean, look, it's I'm not a saint. I'm doing it for myself mainly, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's coming through me, and I feel good doing it. So it's really it's really for myself, and to explore these practices is good for myself. And I know that I have so much learnings or um, evolution still to do in order to embody co-flourishing more fully, you know. So there's also ego there. There is, there's everything is there. And for me to just follow that path and find ways of dancing with that, and finding ways of, you know, staying connected to humility, and but also experiencing these, um how would you call that, these waves of ego energy going through your system, you know, when you think, oh, I've written a beautiful blog article and this is really cool, and, you know, and so on and so on. um, then um, it's also a way of experiencing yourself in the world that is helpful to your own, to my own path. So
I
yeah. so
think
so
this
part of
is
part of the project is just my own, living my own journey. And yeah, might not be interesting to everyone.
well, it's very interesting to me, if that's any consolation.
Mm.
The sense though of what you just described there, though, like you feel alive while doing it. You feel like, you know, you're following what your own path. You're like, there's an aliveness to it. And
Mhm.
I just think that there's I really do think that's one of the more underappreciated qualities. Like, you know, we're often running towards outcomes, end goals,
Mhm.
end results, and
Mhm.
trying to fulfill. I love how you answered the question of what else what will this entail, and you're
Mhm.
ask me in 10 years time,
Mhm.
because there is something about standing in that place of just following this almost, that I
Mhm.
think we've disengaged from or detached ourselves from.
Mhm.
And in some ways I think detached ourselves from, I don't want to say the reality of the unfolding of life, but
Mhm.
we're almost trying to put a plan on top of something that's
Mhm.
like vibrant and
Mhm.
pulsing and moving in ways that we can't predict.
Mhm.
And just when we have the courage almost to stand in this place of aliveness,
Mhm.
I just personally think that's one of the more underappreciated or undervalued aspects of
Mhm.
feeling, I don't know, just this feeling of life through us.
Yeah, absolutely. It, you know, having goals in a way has an aspect of wanting to control life and reality, right? And it's very mind driven. And I think aliveness uh, is the whole system, right? Your mind doesn't feel alive; it might feel excited, or it might feel curious, or whatever, if the mind feels at all, you know. But when you're alive, it's your whole system, being in that state. And um, allowing, I think it has to do with trust also, right? So if I trust less, I have to have more goals. If I trust fully, I don't need any goals. There's just a flow that's taking me somewhere, and I have trust that it's taking me to more beautiful shores. Right? If I don't have trust, then I have a map, and know what place I want to reach on the map. If I can let go of the map, then the river can take me somewhere, and I don't know where.
which which is I think how I'm trying to live, which is how I'm experiencing life, I think, over the last few years. And as you even just said, that something in me was simultaneously terrified, as you
Yeah,
said.
of course.
Do
Of
you
course.
know what I mean? So it's like I was simultaneously reaffirmed by the way you were interpreting this, and then you also
Okay.
simultaneously terrified me,
Yeah, I mean, don't
which I
try this
which
at
I
home.
think.
Don't just jump on a float on a river and throw away the map. That's not sound advice to
Yeah,
give
yeah,
to
yeah.
anyone. So, I think it's a sane response to be somewhat afraid of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, Martin, during the course of the conversation, you're kind of like mentioning the things that you're looking to explore, the questions you've always been kind of asking yourself in life, whether it's exploring even these through your background in philosophy, like asking what the meaning of life, what is it I'm to do in this life, what does this life mean, to kind of moving away from or shifting from a lone wolf perspective into this idea of co-flourishing. Like, you mentioned this idea of the isolation of the yoga mat, or sometimes our meditative
Hmm.
practices and things like this, now into even observations of interdependency, interconnection. And that's truly how, whether it's even observing biodiversity or whatever it may be, this is
Hmm.
truly how humans fully embody or fully live what some of the elements that I think a lot of
Hmm.
us are trying to achieve. I put in air quotes, achieve through our own personal spiritual practices sometimes, when it doesn't loop back into this, or if it doesn't coexist with this idea of co-flourishing.
Hmm.
Just really intrigued to ask you the question, as I always wrap these conversations up with, what is a good life for you, Martin?
I thought I've tried to answer that question in the course of our conversation. Um, what is a good life for me? So it is coming into a state of aliveness that is that comes from a deeper sense of existence, I would say. I don't know what the source is, so I don't want to say a deeper source, but um, the the stillness that you can experience in meditation has something to do with the type of aliveness you can experience when you're fully open to life. Um, and I think for a lot of people, they spend a lot of time in expansion, right? Expanding their mind and growing and looking what's out there and using whatever modalities there are, from spiritual practices to psychedelics to everything else there is. And they expand. And that's beautiful. That's great. We want to expand. But then to bring it all back to one focal point, to create a center of gravity in your being where it's like the Big Bang, where you bring your focus down to one thing that is smaller than a grain of sand. You're so focused on one breath that, and you're just so present with what is, right? Maybe you let go of focus and you're just in your Rigpa mind, as the Tibetans say, and then it can expand again. I think this is something, whatever form and shape and color your life takes, I think that is a good dynamic to unfold in life, the combining expansion with the practice of finding your center again and then expanding from there again. I think the energy, the creative energy in life is coming from the center and not from the expansion. You just need the expansion to be inspired, to get inspiration, and to leave your ego behind and your conditioning behind, and so on and so on. So it's definitely worth pursuing all sorts of expansionary quests, but bring it all back to a center of gravity.
I just found that answer very soothing
Mm-hmm.
as I was listening along to it. So thank you very
Mm-hmm.
much for that. Look, Martin, I've found this conversation to be both extremely enjoyable, extremely insightful, and I look forward to following what unfolds with this co-flourishing project.
Mhm.
And thank you very, very much for joining us here on the What is a Good Life podcast today.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for having the beautiful podcast, and thank you for having me.